Wasn't always this way. Well, back in the days of Adam and Eve, after they got kicked out of the garden, you know, in the Garden of Eden, I think that there was always a perfect natural dew, probably. They didn't have hay balers yet, though, so. Okay, so now we get the whole thing.
Dave came along about 1980, along in then, and we just kind of hit it off. We'd been acquainted in some other circles.
I had known him earlier through some church assignments that we had, but not on a real professional level as far as the farming was concerned.
In fact, his sister and her husband, I was partners with them in a sheep operation. We used to be in the sheep business, and Dave's sister and her husband, we used to take our sheep to Nevada. We had a lot of experience with that, and that's how I basically got acquainted with Dave through that and some other relationships here. And so
it was actually them that told Brent he ought to talk to me. So that year in 1984 was when he approached me about coming over and looking his farm over and seeing if I would like to come over with my wife and my first child that we had at the time and just live here and manage this operation. It was about 600 acres at the time.
When I needed some help, he was interested in coming, and so he came and we got started, and he's been here for ever since, really.
The day that I came over to see this, we drove across the farm right here on this road, and as soon as I saw what was here that you can see behind me, I was going, wow, this is like the Garden of Eden here. And we drove on through and he showed me around, and I said, you know what, we'll do it.
He came from working on a farm over in the Enterprise area all through his youth, so he had a lot of skills and a lot of experience that were very helpful. And so that's always been really great to have him be as familiar with the farming industry as he was. And he was really inventive. He was always figuring out a better way to do things.
This was a new step up for me of actually needing to be in a position to make decisions about how the harvest was done, when the hay was cut, when it was baled, and all those things that go into play in managing an operation. So it put a lot more pressure on me too, to do it, to make sure that I was doing things as well as they could be done. That's when all of this stuff about natural dew and having the right amount of moisture for baling started to press in on us, because that was always the pinch point in any hay operation, was getting the hay in the right condition for that final step of culminating all the other work you do to get it to that point, making sure it's right when you bale it so you don't just ruin all the work that you'd put in ahead of time. Hay has to be cut, it has to be cured in rows, and then when the baler comes along and picks it up, it needs to be dry, but it can't be too dry. So like here, we have this windrow of hay that is pretty well cured out. It needs to be dry enough so you can basically twist it off like that in one twist in order to be safe to put in a bale. If it's got a little bit too much moisture in it, it'll create heating and spontaneous combustion sometimes if it gets too hot from the bacterial activity with too much moisture in there. So the farmer has to make sure that when he comes in and cuts it, rakes it, that it's able to get dry enough to put into that bale. But if it's too dry when he bales it and it doesn't have some amount of moisture in, all of these nice leaves that you see on here will just fall off, and you'll end up with just a bunch of powder and stems, which becomes very devalued in the consumption end.
You just really need to have dew on it in order to have good quality hay. The value in the hay is in the leaves. If the leaves fall off while you're baling it, then your value goes way down.
When my dad was managing Brent Hunter's farm when I was a kid, a lot of summers were very stressful for him when the hay was on the ground and waiting for dew.
I used to walk out on this lawn every night in the middle of the night, probably 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 times to see if the natural dew had started coming in yet when it was time to bale hay.
He'd wake me up because you'd hear him go out the door all night when the hay was on the ground. He'd be going out 3 or 4 times all night, going out to check for dew.
We would get up early in the morning and go out in the truck, and we had 3 balers and 3 tractors. And we'd all sit around in the truck waiting for the dew to come in. One person, usually my dad, he'd be checking the dew, and I'd be sleeping in the truck until I got woke up.
Yeah, it was a nightmare. You know, you went out in your pickup about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you'd get out of the pickup and go check the dew every half hour or so, and sometimes it'd come and sometimes it wouldn't.
And once the dew came in, we'd hit it. We'd go as fast as we could, and any little breakdown was a catastrophe because your window of baling was so short.
And of course we live here in Cedar City, Utah, where it's very dry and there's a very small baling window.
You'd be up half the night looking for natural dew. Then when the dew finally came in, if it did, then you had to go and work the rest of the night and up into the morning, and then you had to get your baler serviced and ready for the next night. And then you tried to go to bed and tried to get some sleep, but you knew you had to get up the next morning still to try to find the dew right when it started coming in, because you knew you had just this little window that you could work with.
Sometimes it'd start and you'd start to bale, and then it'd get too wet, so you'd have to quit. Wait a little while until it started, the sun came up, and then you could start again and bale until 11 or 12 o'clock, and so it was a real nightmare.
So we'd bale sometimes from 1 till 10 in the morning, and then be shut down and just sit there with hay on the ground and watching it get sun faded and waiting for the rain to come in.
So he got very little sleep during each cutting out of the year. It was really stressful. I remember him being pretty stressed out and having a few health issues from the stress and lack of sleep. Just trying to put decent hay up in very dry conditions.
And anybody in the hay business knows that's how it is. You just don't get any rest. And then many times you didn't even get the natural dew you wanted, or you got too much of it. And it was just really a frustration. And it was hard to find the right time, the right conditions to make a good quality bale out of all the work that you'd put in beforehand to grow the hay, to get it cut, to get it raked, to get it dry, and all the things that go into it. I know that, you know, our troubles of modern day aren't as big as a lot of the troubles that our forefathers had, because the way they had to put up hay was so much more difficult than what we do now. But still, it so much depended on your survival in the farm operation to be able to get this stuff put up and have it still retain its value. If you were to go out and just bale hay dry without any natural dew, or bale it with too much natural dew, you would basically be under your profit margin. You wouldn't be staying in business very long. So when I had the responsibilities of making the decisions of when to harvest, when to rake, when to bale, when the dew was on, when the dew wasn't on, all of those things kind of came crashing in. It was pretty heavy responsibility knowing that the operation that I was employed at here at Brent Hunter Farms really depended on me making those kind of decisions in the right way. It was the most frustrating year that I had ever had in this haymaking business. It was in June of 1994. We cut all this hay. The farm wasn't near as big then, it was about 600 acres, but we had about 250 acres that was on the ground, that it was completely dry, and we could not get a natural dew. Like this hay here this morning where we are, it's got a little bit of dew on it, and we could have baled it then, but it's still fairly dry and crackly here. But that day, I mean, this was just like powder and sticks. And so the frustration is we just would wait one more day, hoping we'd get some more natural dew. It was this time of year, it was June of 1994. And we'd get some wind every night, we'd get hot, windy days every day, and we could not get dew. And it was just drier and drier and drier every day, but you kept hoping and hoping, one more day, one more day. Everybody in the hay business knows what that feels like. There's a problem out there that I just continually run into over and over again. My nature is that I want to try to find some solution to it. And I racked my brains for quite a while trying to see if I could come up with some way to overcome this obstacle of getting the right baling moisture for putting this hay up in the final step. And I mean, my faith is strong, and I truly believe that Heavenly Father knows a lot more than I do, and I make it a matter of prayer. This one night I was just praying very specifically. It was in the month of June of 1994, and I just was like, there's got to be a way that we could somehow overcome this obstacle. And it was an interesting experience because it was just an immediate thought that came to me of seeing the girls at Taco Time up here in town put these cold tortillas in a little steamer oven that I'd seen them do a lot of times. They'd put it in there, it was kind of hard and out of the refrigerator, and they'd push a little button, and immediately a big puff of steam would go into that little steamer oven, and it would soften the tortilla. They'd pull it right out. It was immediately soft and slightly moist, and so then they could use it to wrap up a burrito or whatever it was they're making. And so when that thought came to me, I thought, wow, that's an interesting thought. And I just happened at that point in time, because we were during the hay harvest at that point, had a lot of hay on the ground, probably 200 or 300 acres that was all bone dry. We hadn't had natural dew for several weeks.
It was one of those hot June times. It always gets hot in June and no dew, and we'd get up and try to get some dew, and there wasn't any dew, and 3 or 4 days we couldn't get any dew, and we had all this hay to bale. And so that's when Dave came up with the idea to use steam.
And so I went out in the field that next morning and got that little box of hay out of the field, brought it in here to my wife's kitchen, and got her pressure cooker out.
He went in the house, and his wife had a steam pressure cooker blowing steam.
And put a little piece of automotive vacuum hose on the outlet on that, and put a little hay down into a box, and for a few seconds in each spot, and reached my hand in there, and holy cow, it was like exactly the way that hay should be when you bale it. It was soft, it was slightly moist, but it wasn't wet.
And he took a piece of hay and waved it over the steam, and it was just perfect, ready to bale.
Then I got the boss and talked to Brent, and I said, you know, Brent, I found something here that's really neat. I think we might be able to make this work. Anyway, showed him the effects of it, and he was all in at that point.
I'll say, I thought, boy, this is a good idea. I thought, this really has potential. I mean, I didn't have any doubts at all. After he experimented just in his kitchen, I thought, we've got to work on this. This is an idea that we need to develop. So I was really excited and supportive all the way along.
And that was the day the world started changing. And I started seeing a whole new vision for something that could happen, and not just something here on our little operation like I originally was trying to do, but something that day clicked in my head. This is an idea that needs to go to the world, in the whole world of forage making.
He was a farmer, and a lot of times farmers just have to get the job done. And a lot of people will say, oh, it can't be done that way, or it's impossible to do it that way, or this is gonna take a long time to do it. My dad just has the attitude, a farmer attitude of, hey, we don't have time to waste. Let's get right to it, let's get it done.
One thing about Dave is he always tried to improve things.
This is it. He's got it figured out. It just happened.
The guy is a genius.
He'll take things that other people say aren't possible, and he'll make it work.
If I would have known all the roadblocks that you would hit into,
I think on this, how to start.
all the redos and all the things you had to do,
Oh.
I'd have probably said, I think I'll just go back to the farm and bale some hay.